Concerned for the fate of his patients and staff, Weary chose to remain at the hospital. And for many of his staff, if Weary stayed, so would they.
We were all told you could take off if you wanted. And we all said, no, we're going to stay with Weary. Everybody, by the way.
When the Japanese arrived at Weary's Bandung hospital, they immediately wanted to move everybody into a prison camp. Weary protested, and as a way of proving his point, took the Japanese officer, Captain Nakazawa, to see a critically injured Bill Griffiths. Bill had his hands blown off and his eyes destroyed, attempting to defuse a bomb. On seeing Bill, Captain Nakazawa turned to his guards and motioned them to bayonet him. In one of Keith Flanagan's many interviews filmed some 50 years later, Weary still had very strong memories of the incident.
Yes, I remember Bill Griffiths well. He was a gutsy sort of chap from Lancaster, and he arrived having been blown up with a landmine. But his hands were almost completely blown off, his eyes were blown in, his face was shattered, and he had a broken leg, was peppered all over with bits of the bomb. And I don't know why on earth I sort of chose to look after him in a flood of casualties. It was a very lengthy job, but there was something about the chap being still conscious that made me do this.
After he'd done his stuff on the operating table, the following day, a Japanese guard came in and saw my condition, and he and an officer had been told since, looked at me, and the officer gave the nod to the soldier to finish me off, stick his bayonet through me or shoot me or something, and Dunlop again prevented him from doing so. Said no. He stood in front of that guard and the Japanese officer. I said no. Before that bayonet goes through my patient, it will go through me.
There were a couple of soldiers with bayonets who were making sort of menacing noises, and I just had to make it clear that it would be me first. I managed to perhaps influence the situation a bit.
In what would have seemed a million miles away from the turmoil that had engulfed the world, river trader Nai Boon Pong and his family continued selling fruit and vegetables from their barge up and down the picturesque Quai Noi in Thailand. But a series of events was about to change this region forever. Japanese engineers had been sent there to survey the area with the idea of building a railway that would be used as a supply line to the Japanese armies for their intended push into India. After spending 9 months living in camps in Java, Weary Dunlop and his band of captives were transferred to Changi, the main Allied POW camp in Singapore.
As we were in Java for probably 9 months, our clothes just disappeared. The wear and tear and the tropical climate and whatever, and we had nothing to replace them with. Japanese never provided any clothing.
So we arrived with just what we stood up in. Our heads had been shaved and our clothes were starting to fall into tatters and boots in tatters.
And Weary appealed to the commanding officer of the Changi camp, the Australian, to supply us with boots. And the reply given to Weary was, I will give nothing to that Java rabble. And so we never got any boots.
With the influx of Weary's Java rabble, as well as captured soldiers from other parts of Asia, Singapore had become the largest Allied POW camp in the Asia-Pacific region, holding some 120,000 men. It didn't take the Japanese High Command long to realize the value of such a large pool of men. And when the Japanese emperor ordered the commencement of construction of the planned railway from Thailand into Burma, these Allied prisoners of war became slave laborers for the Imperial Japanese Army.
We were only in Changi, a fortnight or something like that. Moved straight up onto the railway line.
It took us 4 or 5 days in the train, packed in like sardines, sleeping across each other. These trucks, they were boiling in the day and freezing cold at night, and then we got to a place called Ban Pong. And we went into the jungle and created a camp out of the jungle. There were these huge bamboos, some of them 10 inches in diameter, and started to build huts out of it. But of course, once we started to build the huts, then they shifted the camp.
Along with the Allied prisoners of war, the Japanese also forced some 200,000 Asian civilians to work on the railway. Locations were identified along the planned 400-kilometer railway route, and groups of prisoners were marched to these locations to set up work camps. The route varied from flat, even ground to thick, impenetrable jungles. Bill Haskell was part of the original Java rabble and considered himself lucky to be still part of Dunlop Force.
I would think that the working conditions on this railway were probably as bad as you could get anywhere, and men survived it. It's remarkable just how far the human frame can be stretched and still survive. It just seemed as though it was never going to end. And it is said that this stretch we're walking over was the most difficult section in the whole of the railway. And I'll show you a bit more of it as we go along. But it wasn't easy, I can assure you.
Weary Dunlop and his force of workers, including many members of his Java rabble, were eventually sent to an area known as Hintok. Hintok was one of the most difficult sections of the railway line, with huge rock faces, dense jungles, and great chasms that needed to be crossed with bridges.
Okay, now if you want an appreciation of what trestle bridges are about, to get this in proper position, a lot of you overfills down the side there and it's been terraced for support. Have a look. See how it's terraced. You wouldn't think it was an area to run a railway, would you?
The work was relentless and continued day and night, regardless of weather conditions or sickness. Malaria was rife, as were dysentery, tropical ulcers, and cholera.
Cholera is an absolutely dramatic illness. A complete sort of shrinking of the body and the eyes falling in, and people go into a sort of a muttering delirium and cholera sleep. The Japanese wouldn't allow anyone to carry them in from the railway. We'd get a message and send out a party over the mountains and get them back, and finally usually drop them down a cliff.
Little Charlie Mould and little Cameron. On a little thing I've got there somewhere, I've got the names of our blokes who died with cholera, but I forgot them. One of them wanted his mother. My complexion, he had bloody freckles. He's only a little bloke, freckles all over his face, and he just pulled the thing out, the intravenous, and said he wanted mum. And there's Weary. So yes, now just sit back, lie down, and your mum will be able to see you shortly. He was dead in about 2 hours' time, you know.
Given just normal medical facilities, the casualty rates along that line there would have been infinitesimal. There would have only been probably 0.05%, mainly due to accidents or something like that. But the sad and sickening part about the railway is that so many men lost their lives and were ruined for life for the want of just an ordinary little bit of medical care. Cheap medicine, not difficult medicine, just antiseptic and that sort of stuff. And the want of it caused so much trouble.
We had an improvised saline made from recrystallised salt, and sterilisers were bamboo jackets with a stolen petrol pipe through them, and we distilled water. And we could run in about 120 pints of saline a day.
I think the most positive thing that was the sheer ingenuity of Australian know-how, and I relate that to the way in which cholera was treated at Hintock Camp, the way in which stills were made, people were able to the saline injected into them intravenously, and made a tremendous difference.
You know, a hospital is made up of all sorts of pots and pans and utensils and beds and so forth, and to treat foully sick people on a bamboo platform with nothing in the way of bedpans, facilities or mugs or sterilisers, terribly difficult. You would have a hospital of, say, 2,500 foully sick people, and you could go along and look at the bones in 200 or 300 legs. Say 1,000 stinking tropical ulcers with flies buzzing around them.
Without basic medicines, Weary was faced with an almost impossible task to contain the spread of disease and the proliferation of tropical ulcers. Tropical ulcers that would eat away at flesh and on many occasions necessitate the removal of limbs.
It did become necessary to amputate legs. People get appalling sort of toxic state and were killed pretty rapidly with these ulcers if their legs weren't removed.
Well, to perform an amputation, they had nothing in the way of surgical equipment. They had nothing in the way of sterilisation, only hot water. To use as a retractor, they had a Dutch Dixie lid which they'd hinged. And the idea, of course, was that you'd put that over the leg. Virtually it was just a bone because they were more or less just skeletons. The bone would pass through there and they'd keep what flesh was back there, and the actual operation was done with a tenon saw. Now this is beyond belief because you've got a man like Markowitz, so they took off something like 130 legs in this camp with this primitive, they would not even supply primitive, operating gear. A terrible tragedy, really.
I had an enormous number of tropical ulcers in a chain of hospitals there. We'd usually have about 200 fellows with the bones you could see in their legs, and but I found a specific yellow powder called iodoform which would control the infection, and I only amputated about 40 legs actually during my time there, but I probably looked after more ulcers than anybody else there.
The tide of war eventually started to turn against the Japanese, and they became more and more desperate to complete construction of the railroad. And so they increased the workload of the men. But still not satisfied with progress, they turned to the hospital camps and the sick and wounded to join the work parties.
Got hit one time when they were blasting. A bloody piece of rock about that size came down and hit me in the back and knocked me rotten down the hill, and I thought I was gone then. But I was in hospital. I couldn't move my arm or anything, everything had stiffened up. Then they were calling for more men to go out, and all that.